Hi, welcome back to the channel. Buried in pocket change, forgotten in drawers, lost in circulation, and yet today, it stands as a global icon worth over $1 million. The Australian penny, a coin born of accident, elevated by legend, and pursued by the world's greatest collectors. Today, we are counting down the top 10 most valuable Australia 1 penny. Let's moving on. First up, 1930 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1930 Australian 1 penny is more than a coin. It is an icon, a legend whispered with awe in collector circles, and a prize that sits at the very peak of Australia's numismatic mountain. Its story is one of accident, survival, and transformation into a cultural phenomenon. When we talk about the 1930 penny, we begin with the Great Depression. Australia, like much of the world, was struggling with unemployment, poverty, and economic collapse. In 1930, the Royal Mint in Melbourne had not intended to strike any pennies for circulation, as the demand for currency was low and reserves from earlier years were considered sufficient. But fate had other plans. A tiny, almost mythical mintage of pennies emerged from the mint, possibly struck as test pieces or as part of a routine die maintenance process. Whatever the reason, perhaps 1 200 to 1 500 coins slipped quietly into circulation, unnoticed, uncelebrated, and unremarkable at the time. For years, no one cared. A penny was a penny, and people were more worried about putting food on the table than about saving small copper discs. It was not until the 1940s and 1950s, when numismatics began to grow in Australia, that collectors started to notice a gap in their penny collections. 1930 was missing. Curiosity turned into discovery, and discovery turned into frenzy. The realization that only a handful existed set fire to the imaginations of collectors. The coin became instantly legendary, whispered about at coin shows, advertised in catalogs, and hunted in change. What sets the 1930 penny apart is not just its rarity, but its aura. To hold one is to hold a piece of accidental history, a mistake that became a masterpiece. The obverse carries the crowned head of King George V, worn on most examples but still commanding, while the reverse presents the bold 1 penny lettering, framed by scrollwork and dots. The design itself is not unusual. What makes it extraordinary is the context and the impossibility of its existence. Today, examples in high grade are among the rarest treasures in the world coin market. In 2019, a specimen fetched $1.6 million, a figure that places it on the same stage as some of the greatest global rarities, like the American 1804 dollar or the British Una and the Lion gold coin. The demand for this coin is immense, transcending collectors into the realm of investors, museums, and even national institutions. Every time one surfaces, it attracts international attention, sparking bidding wars that reflect both its scarcity and its almost mythical status. For investors, the 1930 penny is not simply about owning a coin. It's about securing a piece of Australian identity. It is the crown jewel of any serious collection, a benchmark of prestige, and a guaranteed conversation piece. For collectors, it is the dream, the holy grail, that validates a lifetime of pursuit. And for historians, it is a reminder that even in times of despair, small accidents can produce timeless treasures. The 1930 penny has no equal in the Australian market, and its journey from overlooked circulation piece to million-dollar masterpiece is one of the most remarkable tales in numismatic history. Next up, 1911 Australian 1 penny coin. If the 1930 penny is the king, then the 1911 Australian 1 penny is the cornerstone, the foundation stone of a nation's coinage legacy. This coin marks the beginning of Australia's independence in currency, the very first penny struck for the Commonwealth of Australia after Federation in 1901. Before 1911, Australians used a mixture of British and colonial coins, a patchwork that reflected the nation's colonial past. But by 1911, the young Commonwealth was ready to assert its identity. The government commissioned the Royal Mint to strike its own coinage, and the humble penny was among the first denominations to roll off the dies. The 1911 penny is therefore not just a piece of copper. It is a symbol of nationhood, a tangible milestone in the story of Australia's emergence as a modern state. The coin's design is emblematic of its era. The obverse features King George V, whose ascension to the throne in 1910 was still fresh, making this one of the earliest portraits of his reign. His image lent stability and imperial dignity to the new currency. The reverse bears the striking yet simple 1 penny design, surrounded by an elegant beaded circle and decorative scrolls. There is a subtle confidence in its presentation, not elaborate, not ostentatious, but bold and clear, a statement that this new coinage was here to stay. The mintage was relatively large, but the survival of quality examples is another story altogether. In 1911, pennies were workhorses of the economy, handled daily, tossed into tills, passed across counters, and carried in pockets. They wore down quickly, losing the sharpness of detail, becoming smoothed and battered by years of circulation. As a result, high-grade examples are extraordinarily rare. Finding a 1911 penny in pristine, uncirculated condition is a challenge that excites collectors around the world. It is this scarcity in top grades that drives the coin's market value. Today, a high-grade specimen can command up to $60,000, placing it firmly among the most desirable early Commonwealth issues. The value is not just financial, it is historical, emotional, and symbolic. To own a 1911 penny in top condition is to hold the very birth of Australia's coinage, a relic that connects collectors to the optimism, ambition, and identity of a nation forging its own path. Collectors who acquire this coin often speak of it with reverence. It is not just the first, it is the beginning of a story, the alpha of Australian numismatics. Investors prize it as well, knowing that early issues of any nation tend to appreciate as demand grows and history deepens their significance, and museums and institutions often seek to display it, ensuring that the story of Australia's coinage is preserved for future generations. The 1911 penny is therefore much more than an object of copper. It is a key to understanding Australia's journey, a snapshot of its first steps into independence, and a coin that continues to shine more than a century after it was struck. In the grand tapestry of collecting, it is one of those rare treasures that embodies both the history of a people and the enduring beauty of the art of coinage. Next up, 1925 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1925 Australian 1 penny occupies an almost mythical status in the numismatic landscape, a coin that straddles the delicate line between accessibility and unattainability, rarity and legend. Among collectors, the 1925 penny is ranked as one of the great Australian treasures, second only to the 1930 penny in fame, yet commanding prices that can reach astronomical figures. At its peak, pristine examples have been known to fetch close to $1.4 million, a testament to its scarcity, its mystique, and its enduring role as one of the big three of Australian numismatics. The 1920s were a period of economic transition for Australia. After the devastation of World War I, the nation was attempting to stabilize and find its footing in a new global order. Coin production fluctuated during this time depending on demand, economic conditions, and available resources. By 1925, the mintage of pennies was unexpectedly low. Only around 1.6 million pieces were struck, a fraction compared to many other years. While not an error like the 1930 penny, this deliberate yet modest production made the 1925 issue an instant scarcity once circulation began. Over the decades, many were lost to wear, melting, or simply discarded, leaving surviving high-grade specimens in extraordinarily short supply. Design-wise, the 1925 penny carries the familiar motifs of its era. The crowned bust of King George V on the obverse, dignified and imperial, and the bold 1 penny, reverse encircled by the decorative scrollwork and beading. Yet despite this standard design, the context transforms it into something remarkable. The coin is often described by collectors as ordinary in looks, extraordinary in value, It is a coin that reminds us how history and circumstance can elevate the seemingly mundane into a national treasure. What sets the 1925 penny apart is its trajectory in the collector's market, as demand for Australian pre-decimal rarities surged in the mid to late 20th century. The 1925 penny became a target. Its scarcity, paired with its status as part of the famed trio, alongside the 1930 and 1946 pennies, made it one of the most actively pursued coins in the country. Auction houses began reporting record-breaking sales, and private investors started to take notice. By the 21st century, the 1925 penny was no longer just a collector's prize, but an investment asset, drawing interest from beyond the numismatic world. The pinnacle of its value, with some sales surpassing $1.4 million for pristine, uncirculated examples, underscores the way scarcity, condition, and history interact in the market. Very few coins in numismatics ever achieve this level of desirability, and those that do are usually tied to pivotal historical moments. The 1925 penny has become more than just a coin. It is a benchmark for collectors, a symbol of prestige, and a cultural artifact that represents Australia's interwar years and its evolving economy. To own a 1925 penny is to hold part of an exclusive club. Collectors speak of it with reverence, investors treat it as a trophy asset, and historians celebrate it as an artifact of a fascinating era. In every respect, it is a coin that embodies rarity, allure, and investment-grade value. Next up, 1912 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1912 Australian 1 penny carries with it the weight of being part of the earliest chapters of Australia's independent coinage, a continuation of the story that began with the inaugural 1911 issue. While often overshadowed by its predecessor in symbolic importance, the 1912 penny is no less significant. And in the eyes of collectors, it is a crown jewel of early Commonwealth coinage, commanding values of up to $55,000 in pristine condition. At this time, Australia was still finding its footing as a federated nation. The decision to mint its own currency was not just practical, but symbolic, representing independence from Britain while still retaining ties to the monarchy. Struck in London, the 1912 penny reflected that balance. On the obverse, the portrait of King George V provided continuity with the imperial order, while on the reverse, the bold 1 penny design proclaimed Australia's growing presence in the global economy. What makes the 1912 penny so appealing is its survival rate. Though the mintage was healthy at over 5.7 million pieces, most were absorbed quickly into circulation, enduring the relentless wear and tear of daily commerce. Pennies were the workhorses of their day, passed from hand to hand in shops, markets, and households. Very few survived in uncirculated condition, and those that did are now rarities of immense desirability. Collectors place particular emphasis on the sharpness of strike and the preservation of detail when assessing 1912 pennies. The beard and hair on the portrait of King George V, often the first to wear, are closely scrutinized. Similarly, the reverse design's lettering and decorative scrollwork must remain crisp to command top values. A pristine proof-like example is so rare that when one surfaces at auction, it immediately attracts international bidding attention. The 1912 penny is not just about condition or scarcity though. It also represents a continuation of Australia's national story. As the second year of official Commonwealth coinage, it reinforces the importance of the early 1910s in establishing a numismatic identity. Collectors often seek both the 1911 and 1912 pennies together as a set, valuing them as the opening chapters of a century-long saga of pre-decimal coinage. In today's market, the 1912 penny can reach valuations of around $55,000 for top-grade examples, cementing its place as an investment-grade collectible. It is a coin that appeals to multiple audiences: collectors drawn by its rarity and historic charm, investors drawn by its proven market growth, and historians drawn by its significance as part of Australia's early steps into financial independence. The beauty of the 1912 penny lies in its dual Identity, a workaday coin that once passed unnoticed in the hands of millions, and now, over a century later, a cherished artifact worth tens of thousands of dollars. It is living proof of how time, rarity, and history transform everyday objects into priceless treasures. Next up, 1924 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1924 Australian 1 penny is a coin that has ascended into near-mythical status, an issue that bridges the gap between historical artifact and million-dollar investment asset. It is often spoken of in the same breath as the 1925 and 1930 pennies, forming part of the most elite group of Australian pre-decimal rarities. At its peak, the 1924 penny has commanded auction results approaching $125 million, placing it firmly in the highest echelons of global numismatic value. The significance of the 1924 penny begins with its mintage. Just over 1.5 million were struck, an incredibly low figure when compared with surrounding years. While not an accident like the 1930 penny, the 1924 issue owes its scarcity to economic circumstances of the time. Australia in the 1920s was still navigating the after effects of the First World War, adjusting its economy amidst fluctuating demand and uncertain financial conditions. As a result, fewer coins were needed and fewer were produced. The result? A coin that would later be recognized as a once-in-a-generation rarity. At first glance, the coin itself appears unassuming. The obverse carries the crowned bust of King George V, executed with the royal dignity characteristic of the period. The reverse, with its simple 1 penny, framed by the classic scrollwork and beaded rim, appears similar to countless other pennies. But this very ordinariness masks its true importance. What makes the 1924 penny extraordinary is its rarity in high condition. Most of the coins that entered circulation were heavily worn through everyday use, handled in shops, passed over counters, jingled in pockets. Time and wear eroded their details, leaving only a vanishingly small number in pristine states of preservation. The rarity of high-grade specimens has propelled the 1924 penny to astonishing levels in the marketplace. Collectors and investors alike pursue it feverishly, knowing that opportunities to acquire an uncirculated example are exceedingly rare. When one does appear on the market, it inevitably generates fierce competition, both nationally and internationally. At over $125 million, it stands as one of the most valuable copper coins in the world. Beyond its financial allure, the 1924 penny symbolizes the unpredictability of history. It reminds us that sometimes value lies not in intentional artistry or design variation, but in the sheer accident of survival. For collectors, it is a pinnacle of achievement, the crown jewel of a serious Australian penny collection. For investors, it represents scarcity on a global scale, a tangible asset whose value has steadily climbed for decades. And for historians, it is a silent witness to Australia's interwar years, a modest copper disc transformed by circumstance into a national treasure. The 1924 penny is proof that even the simplest of objects, under the right conditions, can become priceless. It embodies the alchemy of numismatics, where rarity, history, and human fascination combine to elevate a coin from everyday use to multi-million-dollar legend. Next up, 1913 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1913 Australian 1 penny is a coin that sits quietly yet proudly in the early lineage of Australian Commonwealth coinage. As the third issue after Federation, it represents continuity, nationhood, and a growing sense of permanence in Australia's currency system. While less publicized than its 1911 inaugural predecessor, the 1913 penny is nevertheless a highly respected rarity in its own right, commanding values of up to $50,000 in uncirculated condition. This was a period when Australia was still building its identity as a federated nation. Currency was one of the most visible expressions of independence, and each year of early pennies reinforced that story. The 1913 issue was struck in London, like its predecessors, before Australia fully developed its own large-scale minting capacity. These coins were shipped across the seas to serve in daily commerce, humble copper workhorses destined for the hands of shopkeepers, workers, and families across the nation. The design followed the established pattern. The obverse bore the portrait of King George V, his image dignified, confident, and representative of imperial continuity. On the reverse, the bold 1 penny, design framed by scrollwork and a beaded rim, provided a sense of strength and clarity. There was nothing experimental or unusual in its visual form, but its importance lay in its role as part of the earliest foundation of Australia's own monetary system. The survival of high-quality examples of the 1913 penny is rare. Most of the 3.6 million coins struck that year were absorbed into circulation, enduring years of constant handling. As with most copper coins, they tarnished, wore down, and were lost to time. The few surviving examples in top condition are fiercely protected by collectors and rarely come to market. When they do, they often fetch strong prices, with the best preserved reaching $50,000. What makes the 1913 penny appealing is not only its scarcity, but also its symbolic position. It is an early chapter in Australia's coinage story, a tangible link to a formative era in national history. Collectors often pursue it alongside the 1911 and 1912 issues to form a complete trio of early Commonwealth pennies. Together they tell a story of new beginnings, resilience, and continuity. For investors, the 1913 penny represents stability and growth potential. Like many early Australian coins, its trajectory in value has been steadily upward, fueled by increasing global interest in Commonwealth coinage and the finite number of pristine examples. For historians, it represents more than metal. It is a small artifact of the young nation's identity, a modest yet meaningful piece of its journey. The 1913 penny may not shout its importance like the 1930 or 1925 rarities, but it remains a cornerstone of any serious collection. Its combination of age, scarcity, and historic relevance ensures that its market value will remain strong, while its cultural significance will continue to grow as a cherished emblem of Australia's earliest years of nationhood. Next up, 1923 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1923 Australian 1 penny is one of the most revered coins in the nation's numismatic history, a rarity that occupies its own exalted place beside the legendary 1930 and the elusive 1925. For decades, it has stood as a cornerstone of collecting ambition, a coin that transformed from overlooked copper to million-dollar treasure. With auction results climbing as high as $1.1 million, the 1923 penny is a true blue-chip asset in the numismatic world. The story of its scarcity is a fascinating one. In 1923, the Melbourne Mint transitioned from the older minting presses to newer equipment, and in the process, production schedules were disrupted. Records indicate that only a fraction of the intended pennies were struck before the changeover, possibly as few as 15,000 to 20,000 coins. Compared to the millions normally issued in surrounding years, this mintage was minuscule. These coins entered circulation quietly, with little fanfare, blending into the daily flow of commerce. Unnoticed for decades, the design follows the familiar template, King George V's portrait on the obverse, paired with the classic 1 penny reverse, framed by scrollwork and beading. Yet what distinguishes the 1923 penny is not its design, but its survival. The overwhelming majority were worn down through circulation, leaving only a handful of higher-grade specimens. These survivors are now treated as treasures of national importance, each one catalogued and celebrated when it surfaces. The 1923 penny is also deeply embedded in collector lore. Alongside the 1925 and 1930 issues, it completes what is often called the Big Three of Australian pennies, the ultimate set that defines a world-class collection. Possessing even one of these is a mark of prestige. Owning all three is a feat few can ever hope to achieve. From a market perspective, the 1923 penny is an exemplar of stability and growth. Over the decades, its value has consistently risen, driven by both scarcity and relentless demand. The 1.15 million achieved by pristine examples underscores its position as a financial asset as much as a historical artifact. Collectors see it as a pinnacle. Investors treat it as a trophy asset, and historians revere it as a tangible symbol of the quirks and accidents that define Australia's coinage history. To hold a 1923 penny is to hold an enigma, a coin born from disrupted minting, overlooked for decades, then elevated to near-legendary status. It is proof of how circumstance can turn a simple copper coin into one of the rarest and most valuable treasures in Australian history. Next up, 1936 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1936 Australian 1 penny marks the closing chapter of an era. It was the final penny struck during the reign of King George V, whose portrait had graced Australian copper coinage since 1911. When collectors hold a 1936 penny, they hold the end of a dynasty, a farewell to both a monarch and a formative period in the nation's numismatic journey. On the surface, the coin appears similar to many of its predecessors. The obverse bears the mature portrait of King George V, his image weathered yet dignified, reflecting the continuity of an era that spanned World War I, the Great Depression, and immense global change. The reverse features the familiar 1 penny design, simple, bold, framed by the traditional scrollwork and beaded rim. Yet within this seeming ordinariness lies its true appeal. The historical significance of being the last issue of a long reign. While mintage numbers were respectable, survival in exceptional condition is another story. Most 1936 pennies were absorbed into everyday use, enduring heavy wear as Australia transitioned from one monarch to another. The majority of coins available to collectors today show signs of circulation, with only a tiny fraction surviving in pristine, uncirculated state. These are the examples that command the highest premiums, with valuations soaring to $45,000 at auction. The 1936 penny is also special because of its place in the collector narrative. It bridges the gap between the George V series and the George VI era, symbolizing continuity and change all at once. For many collectors, completing a run of George V pennies would be incomplete without the final 1936 issue, elevating demand for high-quality specimens. From a market perspective, the 1936 penny is a mid-tier rarity that offers both historical gravitas and strong investment appeal. While not as scarce as the big three, its position as a last-year issue gives it enduring desirability. Collectors worldwide recognize its importance, and institutions often highlight it as part of the broader story of Australia's transition into the modern age. Beyond its financial value, the 1936 penny represents the passing of an era. George V's reign was one of the most turbulent in modern history, and this coin, modest in form but rich in meaning, serves as a quiet testament to resilience, change, and continuity. It is not merely copper. It is history cast in metal, and in its finest form. It can command tens of thousands of dollars from those who understand its true significance. Next up, 1915 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1915 Australian 1 penny stands as one of the most captivating rarities of the Commonwealth series, a coin that exudes mystery, scarcity, and immense historical value. For decades, it has fascinated collectors, not only for its beauty and early date but also for the unique set of circumstances surrounding its minting. At its peak, pristine examples of this issue have commanded close to $950,000, making it one of the most valuable copper coins ever produced in Australia. To understand the 1915 penny, one must place it in the context of a world at war. Australia was deeply involved in World War I, and resources were stretched thin. Production of coinage was sporadic, with supply chains and minting schedules under pressure. The 1915 issue was struck in both London and Calcutta, and discerning between these two origins requires careful study of subtle details such as mint marks and die characteristics. The Melbourne Mint was also under immense strain, meaning that far fewer coins than usual were struck. The result of this fragmented production was a mintage that, while seemingly healthy at first glance, yielded a very low survival rate in high grade. Most examples went straight into circulation, enduring heavy wear during a period of intense economic activity. The copper itself, prone to tarnish and corrosion, made matters worse, ensuring that top-quality specimens would be exceedingly rare. The obverse features King George V, his portrait firmly established as the symbol of stability during years of global turmoil. The reverse maintains the classic penny design with its strong central lettering and ornate framing. Though visually similar to other issues, the 1915 penny carries with it the weight of history, a coin minted in wartime, passed through the hands of soldiers' families, shopkeepers and workers, each one carrying their burdens during one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Today, the 1915 penny is revered as a trophy coin. At auction, its finest examples have commanded values of up to $950,000, reflecting both its scarcity and its historical gravity. Collectors regard it as a keystone of the early Commonwealth period, while investors treat it as a blue-chip asset, stable, rare, and globally significant. Its value has risen steadily over the decades, cementing its reputation as a cornerstone of numismatic investment portfolios. The 1915 penny is not simply a coin. It is a relic of wartime Australia, a tangible piece of history that survived against the odds. For those fortunate enough to hold it, it represents both a financial masterpiece and a deeply meaningful artifact of the nation's past. Next up, 1920 Australian 1 penny coin. The 1920 Australian 1 penny is one of the most intriguing issues in the entire pre-decimal series, famous not only for its rarity, but also for the remarkable variety of minting anomalies that emerged during its production. Collectors have long been captivated by this issue, and in high-grade condition, examples can command up to $70,000 at auction, placing it among the most important coins of the Commonwealth period. By 1920, Australia was navigating the challenges of the post-World War I economy. The Melbourne Mint was under pressure to produce pennies, yet technical difficulties plagued the production process. The result was a year filled with peculiarities, multiple die varieties, inconsistent strikes, and the introduction of a small dot above or below the scroll on the reverse of certain coins, a feature that would become legendary among collectors. These variations have divided the 1920 penny into several distinct types, each carrying its own value and desirability. The dot above variety, for example, is particularly scarce and highly sought after, often commanding the highest premiums in the market. The more common varieties, while still valuable, highlight the inconsistent minting processes of the time and serve as fascinating study pieces for numismatists. Design-wise, the coin continues the established pattern. The obverse features King George V, now a familiar and stable presence on Australian coinage. The reverse carries the bold 1 penny design, unchanged in form but distinguished in 1920 by the unusual presence or absence of small dot markers. These tiny details have transformed an otherwise ordinary design into a numismatic puzzle, one that collectors continue to study, catalogue, and debate to this day. What makes the 1920 penny so remarkable is how it encapsulates the intersection of rarity and variety. It is not just the low number of surviving, high-grade examples that makes it valuable, but also the layered complexity of its types. Each collector is drawn into the chase, seeking not just a 1920 penny but the specific variety that completes their set. At the top end of the market, flawless specimens, especially of the scarcer dot varieties, have realized up to $70,000 under the hammer, and their trajectory suggests long-term stability and growth. The 1920 penny is therefore both a historical curiosity and an investment-grade asset, attracting a global audience of serious collectors. In many ways, the 1920 penny is a perfect representation of numismatics itself, a simple object transformed into a treasure by the quirks of production, the passage of time, and the endless fascination of human curiosity. It is a coin that blends history, rarity, and mystery, ensuring its place among the most coveted in Australia's coinage story.